Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to This Week in Politics. I think this week it's going to take me a little while, but I'm going to get caught up, I promise. Um, I got to tell you, I'm going to start with a story that we called Crybaby in the intro. By the way, if you looked at the intro and you saw the exclamation point there, you know that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm not going to talk about crybabies. I labeled it that because I have no notes on this. It's about a video I watched today about Ilhan Omar. She is the Muslim female that has been elected to the House of Representatives from Minnesota. Now, first off, she gave a speech to CAIR, CAIR, which is a front for radical Muslims. They want Muslims to take over the United States. They are all for jihad. They finance them and many other organizations finance terrorism. They are an unindicted co-conspirator for 9/11. You should do your research on this organization. Now, this Ilhan Omar went down there to give a speech. Now, nothing wrong with giving speeches. I happen to disagree with who she's giving it to, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was what she said in the speech. Now, first off, there were hundreds of protesters outside, rightfully so. She addressed that. And by the way, none of them got in. It was all Muslims inside, and she acknowledged that. So that tells me that that organization was discriminating based on nationality or religion by not letting anybody else in. But I digress. And from the dais, she said she didn't give a hoot in hell. Well, she didn't use those words. She didn't care a whit about what anybody outside said because she knew who she was and she knew that she was right. Blah 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 blah. The whole speech was about pro-Muslim, um, and a dig at this country. It irritated me to no end to hear that a representative of the United States Congress is standing up in front of a bunch of jihadist Muslims telling them to go raise hell because they want to make us uncomfortable, which is what she said. I wrote a note, and one of them texted me back or messaged me back and told me to leave the country because I said, if you don't like it, leave. To which I promptly wrote back and I said, my ancestors came here from another country, and our goal was to be part of what was uniquely American, to help be part of the society, to build, to create, to assimilate, not to whine and cry about me not being treated the way I was being treated over in France, not to come in here and complain and whine and bitch because I'm not getting my way, or you're not serving my kind of food, or you're not letting me practice my religion, which was hilarious. Another thing she said was, how can she feel comfortable in a country where she can't take her prayer mat and take 15 minutes 4 times a day to go pray? Excuse me. Why should you be any different than the kids in our schools who can't pray for 1 minute before school starts like we used to when we were kids? That's been banned. But now you want a special exception because you're a Muslim? She readily admits up there that she's never read the Quran. She can't quote chapter and verse, to which I typed in and I said, perhaps you should read the Quran, because there are 32 different verses in the Quran that tell Muslims to kill unbelievers. That's a fact. I've done many shows on that. So for her to stand up there and take a pro-Islam, anti-American, anti-Donald Trump, she badmouthed Trump from there too, well, she's a Democrat. I mean, I kind of expect it. To use the weight of being a legislator to get into a fight over religion irritates me to no end. If you are from Minnesota, you need to get this female the heck out of there. Now, I understand that Obama settled all those Somalis all in one area. I understand that. But somehow, some way, you guys have got to disseminate them and not allow them to propagate like dogs. This is what happens. Next thing you know, California is going to be sending us illegal Mexicans to the house. And then Texas. And Florida will be sending us illegal Cubans. Come on now. I'm not opposed to legal immigration because those people want to be part of an America that is the best country on the planet. They want to assimilate. They want to build. They want to create. I have no problem at all with that. The problem I have is when legal or illegal, they come over here and they expect us to change our country and our wants and our needs to fit them. I did many shows about this, about the gays. At the time, they made up less than 1% of the population, and yet people were bending over backwards, no pun intended, to give them what they want, to change our customs, to change our morals, to change everything just to suit 1% of the population. I had a problem with it then. I have a problem with it now, whether it's because of your sexual orientation, your country of origin, your immigration status, or your religion. I do have a problem if you don't want to assimilate. Get the hell out. If you don't like it, go home. Nobody asked you here. And if you're not willing to be part of a great America, then you need to get the hell out and stop complaining. All right. That wasn't part of what I wanted to do, but I'm glad I did it. I feel better. All right. Now, I got to tell you, I am truly irritated with having to do this story. But somebody needs to say it's about time. And I still don't have the final word on this. We're talking about, I think in the intro I put apology, ? Because if I knew that if I wrote anything about, like the last story, if I wrote anything about Muslims, or in this story, if I wrote anything about Mueller, I was going to raise eyebrows at Google or so. Apology, ? The story is that the Mueller probe ends with his report being sent in, okay? I don't really care what the report says. It's going to be a political tool, and it means nothing to me. There's nothing in there about Trump, which is what this was all about. But I did want to, there was a story here, and I was going to go through this, but I don't want to because there's really nothing here. But they did post a copy of the letter from the Attorney General, Barr. Mueller gave his report to Barr, and then Barr sent copies to Lindsey Graham and Dianne Feinstein on the Judiciary Committee, the ranking Republican and ranking Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. And I want to read this letter that the Attorney General sent. It said, "Dear Chairman Graham, Chairman Nadler, Ranking Member Feinstein, and Ranking Member Collins, I write to notify you pursuant to blah, 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 that Special Counsel Robert Mueller III has concluded his investigation of Russian interference." Oh, that's the first time I've seen that. So this is the final report. It is over. "The Special Counsel regulations require that I provide you with a description and explanation of instances, if any, in which the Attorney General or Acting Attorney General concluded that a proposed action by a special counsel was so inappropriate or unwarranted under established departmental practice that it should not be pursued. There has been no such instances during the special counsel's investigation. The special counsel has submitted to me today a confidential report explaining the prosecution or declination decision he has reached as required by blah, blah, blah. I am reviewing the report and anticipate that I may be in a position to advise you of the special counsel's principal conclusion as soon as this weekend. This letter, by the way, is dated the 22nd, which was Friday. Separately, I intend to consult with Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein and Special Counsel Mueller to determine what other information from the report can be released to Congress and the public consistent with the law, including special counsel regulations and the department's long-standing practices and policies. I remain committed to as much transparency as possible, and I will keep you informed as to the status of my review. Finally, the special counsel regulations provide that the Attorney General may determine that public release of this notification would be in the public interest, blah, blah, blah. I have so determined, and I will disclose this letter to the public after delivering it to you. And that's the letter that I just read. So it is over. The General Counsel, Robert Mueller, has ended his investigation. He's written his report. He submitted it in. And there are no more warrants to be done. Now, again, today, I saw Chuck U. Schumer get behind a microphone, and he went on a rampage about who should be doing what, and the House should do this, and the Attorney General should do that, and the President should do this, and to which I typed in and I said, excuse me, but elections have consequences, and you, sir, are not the president. And my question to you is, are you going to apologize to President Trump? He deserves one from you and from Nancy Spitbucket Pelosi. You both have been rude and nasty, and your whole party has been divisive and rude and nasty to Trump specifically, and the election of Trump in general, as demonstrated by Mueller. And the attempted silent coup waged by your party and your Justice Department. I find it abhorrent. But I'm going to get around that report. I'm not going to do that because I didn't want to do that in the first place. But it is news, and it is big. And since it's taken up the first 2 years of the president's term, I do feel that it needs to be covered. Now, on that same day in the paper, there was an op-ed in there, and the name of it is After the Mueller Report, and it was written in the Wall Street Journal by Holman W. Jenkins Jr. And I found this article interesting. It said, while Washington sizzles over news that the Mueller report is now in the hands of Attorney General Barr, it pays to remember the other big intrigue from the 2016 election. You won't find this column arguing that it was ever realistic that Hillary Clinton might be charged for email-related crimes. It was even less likely when her opponent became Donald Trump. Still, the inner workings of the project of finessing Hillary's email vulnerabilities should be especially resonant now. The man who deliberately sought the Mueller investigation, FBI Director James Comey, was key to that finessing and also had every reason to want to change the subject from his own role in the 2016 race. And we know that the same small circle of FBI headquarters personnel who worked on the Hillary investigation also gave birth to the Trump investigation that would be handed over to Special Counsel Robert Mueller. He is recounting the silent coup, and he's naming names here. Nothing that we don't know so far, but he's putting a type of chronology down. This is not the entirety of it, but what he's saying is he's building a stair step to where we're going to go. And Comey is the one that initiates. So what have we learned that's new? In just the past few weeks, the release of a congressional interview with FBI lawyer Lisa Page revealed two ways the FBI tried unsuccessfully to resist attempts by the Obama administration to influence his questioning of Mrs. Clinton. We also know, thanks to the combination of press reporting and public disclosure, that Mr. Comey himself possessed what appeared to be direct evidence from a Russian source of a scheme to fix the Clinton investigation involving Obama Attorney General Loretta Lynch. What also seems clear from the public record, including the public report of the Justice Department's own Inspector General, was that the FBI had little interest in finding out if the information was true, false, or a Russian plant. I want to go back to something. I want you to listen to the verbiage here. When he says, so what have we learned? So he says, in the past few weeks, the release of a congressional interview with FBI lawyer Lisa Page revealed two ways. Now listen to this. It revealed two ways the FBI tried unsuccessfully to resist attempts by the Obama administration to influence his questioning of Mrs. Clinton. What that means is the Obama administration influenced the way the Justice Department questioned Mrs. Clinton. The FBI couldn't stop it. That's important. That links Obama directly to the cover-up of the email scandal. That's key. And let's go on. Instead, Mr. Comey, as he told us himself, seized on it as a justification for his protocol-busting intrusion into the Clinton case to convince the American people that the investigation was not fixed. Again, he lied. His first intervention led to his second intervention, in some ways the weirdest, in which Mr. Comey reopened the Hillary case just before Election Day, believing Mrs. Clinton was certain to win. Now pollsters tell us this action may have inadvertently tilted the race to Mr. Trump. I don't believe that for a second. The press is not interested in this story, thanks in no small part to the Mueller-Russian distraction. The Mueller report itself is not likely to say anything about any of this, though it represents the most consequential, if indirect, way Russia activities influenced this election. It did not. His comment has gone virtually unreported in the U.S. media. This is not the place to trace how the Steele dossier begat the Mueller investigation, but it clearly did, as well as with previous FBI counterintelligence investigation of the Trump campaign, which Mr. Mueller inherited. That is actually getting closer to the beginning of the silent coup. Because the dossier spells the names of some of Mr. Trump's associates correctly, to this day, some in the press insist on writing that many of the allegations in the Steele dossier have been corroborated. They have not. They haven't been. The dossier remains one of the biggest red herrings in American history, a thing that had no provenance that the U.S. press should have respected. Whether by accident or design, it has occluded this more important story. It was on purpose. Our media continues to obsess over a document any 9-year-old with Google and an inkjet printer could have created. It has no interest in a secret government report that details how a piece of dubious Russian intelligence was used by the FBI to meddle ineptly in a U.S. presidential election. They did not. At this late hour, reporters even now cling to the hope that Mr. Mueller will validate the improbable Steele allegations. Our language casually refers to the news media, but many in the media wouldn't know news if it bit them in the rear end. That's not their job. To them, the story is whatever the social animals and their milieu say it is, even if it rests on something as fundamentally flimsy and anonymous as a Steele dossier. Notice even his punitive author has no interest in making the rounds to defend his work. And the article ends with, I am not alleging partisan bias here. There was. partly because portraying Mr. Trump's victory as a fluke occasioned by the actions of Mr. Comey fits neither side's preferred narrative. I am alleging a media groupthink that has many reporters falling down drunk with credulity for the Steele allegations, even as the real story passes them by. Let's hope once the Mueller red herring has been reeled in, the press will start doing its job again and get to the bottom of the FBI's deranged actions in the 2016 arraign. Okay. There's a couple of things in here that I would like to take the opportunity to enunciate. Number one, he is absolutely correct about the press. I am old enough to remember when, even back in the 70s, right wing knew that the press was liberal. They've been liberal for many, many, many years. But at least they put up a fight to try to be as neutral as they could. I mean, if a Republican was in office, it was very normal to have, 60, 70, 80% press against them. And the more conservative they were, the higher the percentage. It's never been like this with Trump. Trump has always had 92% plus negative press. And that's from all press. So 92 times out of 100, they're bad-mouthing Trump and his administration, and his approval numbers keep going up. So that ought to tell you. But the press, and in my opinion, it happened in the first Obama election, when the press came out and they just overtly said, we are no longer neutral. We're not even going to pretend that we're for Obama. That one news head on one of the shows said when Obama spoke, he felt a shiver run up his leg. I mean, first off, how weird can that be? And secondly, it's over. I mean, so from that point forward, and, it used to be that the press, so there is a reason that the press is mentioned in the Constitution. It's the only other job outside of government that is mentioned and given special rights. And that is because their job was to keep all three branches of government accountable. If one of them stepped out of line, the press should catch it, investigate it, report it, and let the chips fall where they may. Now, that usually only happened when a Republican stepped out of line. But once in a while, they caught a Democrat running out of line, And an obvious example would be Bill Clinton. He had women in and out of there. He had girls that were barely legal in and out of there. And they voted to impeach, but they didn't get him out. And then it was all swept under, and and he was as popular after as he was before. Then we have Brett Kavanaugh come in. No problems, just allegations. Women that were paid to come forward. They tried to ruin this man's reputation with no proof and nothing. But the guy was a conservative Republican, and they tore him apart. The only reason he survived is because that guy's got a set on him, and he took them all to task. And good for him. So there's always been a bias, but now they don't even decide that they're going to do a news story based on the relevance of the story or the relevance of the facts in the case. In fact, they don't even follow stories. It appears that management decides what is going to be the story for the day, and then reporters go right up. They make up a story. They make up the facts. They make up the storyline. They make up the ending, and they put it in a paper or on TV, and they call that news. I'm sorry, it's nowhere near news. Um, you could pick up any newspaper. I listen to a lot of radio, and I read a lot of newspapers, and just about any of them, you can pick them up and you can go through the article. You can say, well, that's an opinion, and that's an opinion, and that's a lie, and that's not true. I mean, even when I was a kid, I always thought, and nobody said anything to me. I just figured it out. They need to, over the newscaster's head, they needed to have a little sign, and it would have three choices: news, opinion, or no, just two. Two would be good. News, opinion. Every sentence he said, a light would flash. That's an opinion. The next sentence, that's true. That's news. Next sentence, that's opinion. That way, at least when you watch or listen to what's supposed to be the news, you'll be able to know. Some of the big, like the New York or the Washington Post and Facebook, they all try to say and tell their readers that they are doing fact checking. They can't even get the facts right. When they fact check a Democrat, it's always much better than when they fact check a Republican. A fact is supposed to be a fact no matter who says it or does it. In the case of Facebook, they've got all left-wing outside consultants deciding what is hate speech and what is checking the facts. Let me ask you a question. If you're a left-winger, what would you consider hate speech? Anything that goes against your point of view. So if I get on Facebook and I talk about pro-life, that's hate speech to a left-winger. But my facts are still accurate. And you can pick any topic at all. And that is the bias that comes through. And they're using these outlets to say that they are fact checking. They are not. All these so-called fact checkers is an escape valve for the major organizations. And I think that's outrageous. I mean, if you can't even, as a reporter, whether you're visual, audio, newspaper, print, whatever, if we cannot even agree what the facts are, how in the world are we going to agree on what the news is? An obvious example would be if you have two senators and both of them are caught having affairs. One of them gets kicked out or quits, and the other one stays. Which one do you think quit or got kicked out? The Republican, of course. Democrats never quit. They hang on there because their reputation means nothing to them. They rarely get booted out. Look at those three over, I think, what was it, Virginia? Where the governor had, he was in for infanticide and the attorney general was for raping a couple of women and the other guy was for blackface. I mean, all three of those Democrats, they're all three Democrats. That just died. Every one of them stayed in office. Nobody quit. But that whole story got swept right under the rug, and they're all three still in office. But you find one Republican anywhere that did any one of those things, and he'd have been run out of town on a rail on his way to jail. I want you to think about that. Those three did that, and Paul Manafort, who is in his 70s, is sitting in jail for something he did decades ago while his wife is at home ill and he's in a wheelchair and he's in solitary confinement for a white collar something or other. Okay, so if he dodged taxes, I agree. He should be punished. Make him pay his back taxes plus penalties, but you don't put a 72-year-old man in a wheelchair in solitary confinement and then let these three bozo Democrats in Virginia go scot-free. You see what I mean? There are two levels in this country that are evolving of justice. One is for the liberal Democrats and one is for everybody else. The silent coup that has just happened, that supposedly is concluded. I think it's just one part of it. Now that that's done, now the rest of them is going to kick in until the next election, which is sad. But they all, just what we know right now, the list of people that should be in jail are all liberal Democrats, and they're all in the government, and they're all in Washington. And you know the names. You know who they are. They should all be in jail. Until that happens, the American people are never going to trust our government again. Ever, ever, ever. Until we see signs that the dual system of justice has been eliminated and right is right and wrong is wrong is brought back to our government. Now, the last story I want to talk about is I called Back to College in the intro. And I want to talk about the Electoral College. I find it extremely interesting that all of the things that the Democrats want to do are all because, in this election, all because they lost. They want to get rid of the Electoral College because it worked against them. They don't want to build the wall because they want illegal immigration to work for them in the election, and so they can get more seats in Congress. They want to do the Green New Deal so they can control more taxes and more parts of the country. All of these, none of these things that they are mentioning has anything to do with the American people, has nothing to do with what's best for our country. Now, if you don't understand what the Electoral College is, I'll give you just a brief overview. When our founding fathers were setting up the government, they were geniuses, by the way. This had never been done before, and they came up with this. This is genius. And Trump was only the third time in American presidential history where that has happened. One of the others was W, and I can't remember the other one. It might have been Kennedy over Nixon, but I'm not positive. But anyway, first off, we are not a democracy. Democracies always end in dictatorship, always. And you say, well, how does that happen? Okay, well, let's just say, for an example, that we did not have the Electoral College. Here's what would have happened in the last election. California, New York, Texas, and Florida would have picked our president. Clinton would have won, okay? So Clinton is now president. 4 states picked our president. You want to throw Florida in there? Okay, let's say 5 states. So the 5 most populous states in the country picked our president. That means in Illinois, 6 states. So let's say the other 44 states have no say-so at all. And guess what? The other 44 states, 44 of 50 states, are conservative Republican. And that's a fact. You can look at any map. I saw something the other day. There's 3,100 counties, and Trump won over 3,000 of them. Hillary only won 100 of them. But in those 100 counties, was a majority of the population. So 100 counties, and I'm talking in generalities, 100 counties in this entire country would have picked our president. Los Angeles County, New York City. Okay? That is outrageous. That means that this election that just passed and every election going forward, the Democrats would win. As they strengthen and they get their grip on that power, the Republicans would be worthless. Because if they control the presidency, they will also control the House of Representatives because they will have more Democrats coming in as they get elected. Till eventually we have one party, whether we have, some token Republicans, but then we will be down to one party. Now, when you're down to one party, guess what kind of thing starts happening? It would be very easy to see where, as an example, the two-term limitation on presidents is lifted because you've got, if the Democrats have control of the president, the Senate, and the House, they can do whatever they want. The other 44 states don't have any say-so. They could tax whatever they want to tax. They want a 70% tax, they could pass that tomorrow. I'm living in Illinois, and the governor here, Pritzker, just came into office. He hasn't been in office 3 months. He's raised the minimum wage. He's pushing for a progressive tax. He's increased regulation. He's doubling the taxes on gasoline. And he's taxing plastic bags. Tax. Instead of saying, why don't we cut spending? When the last governor was in there, they raised the taxes, and the justification for raising taxes, the sales tax, was because of the deficit. But when you look closer at it, they raised taxes, as an example, 3%, and then they raised spending 3%. We have a deficit in this state of retirement. So Pritzker wants to go out and borrow money, which is on a bond, which, by the way, we're one step above junk bond status in the state. But he wants to borrow money to pay to the retirement funds. And now we have more bills, and then we'll have to raise taxes to pay the bills. You see how that works? And the reason that this is all getting passed is because the Democrats in this state have a super majority, which means they can do whatever they want. The Republicans now are basically toothless. The Democrats can do anything they want. And if the governor decides he wants to try to play politics and veto something, the House has a veto-proof majority. The same is coming to the United States government if people don't wake up. We got to get these people the hell out of office, and we got to educate the American people about the Electoral College. So the framers of the Constitution said, okay, well, we're not a democracy, so mob rule is not going to rule, because if we do that, we're going to end up with a dictator. So how can we find a blend between democracy and making sure that every state gets a voice? The House and the Senate. The House has 435 members. And those members each come from a congressional district in each state. So if your state has 100 congressional districts, you have 100 people in Congress. If it has 3, then you have 3 people, and those districts are based on population. And I think it's 500 and some thousand. So for every 500,000, you get a congressman, okay, based on population. So in the House, California, New York, Florida, Texas all have huge huge power. But then when you go to the Senate, every state in the union gets 2. It doesn't matter how big or how small you are. That way, in the Senate, Wyoming has as much power as California, New York, Florida, or Texas. And that's how it works. Now, the Electoral College is 535 votes, 435 in the House, 535 or 100 in the Senate. And, you know, actually it might be a couple of more than that because I think DC gets a couple of votes too. So, but anyway, so when you go in and you vote for president, okay, that's not really how that votes. That vote goes to Joe Blow, who's going to represent that president. So he actually gets the vote. So if you have, 100 people plus 2 senators, and it's supposed to work that if your district votes Republican, then the Republican votes for, in the House votes for the Republican, and the next one over next to it is a Democrat, they vote for the Democrat, okay? So that each district in the state gets 1 vote each, and then the 2 senators become the tiebreakers in that state, okay? That way, mob rule does not win. If every illegal from Mexico goes to California and votes, the Democrat will always get a huge plurality of votes. They will always win the popular vote. But they won't win the presidency if everyone goes there. Now, the story I led off with, that Ilhan Rohan or whatever her name is from Minnesota, she got elected because of Obama. Obama took 10,000 Somali refugees and put them all in one area in Minnesota. So what do? They vote, and they voted for a Somali female, a Muslim Somali female. 1 more Democratic seat in Minnesota. Now, I don't know who had that seat before, and I don't know how far back it was, if it was Republican or Democrat. My guess is if Obama did that, there was a Republican there, and he got rid of it by doing that. But the purpose of the Electoral College is so that every state has at least a say. That's the purpose. And 44 out of the 50 states ought to want that. Now, I want to go over this article. Targeting the Electoral College. One thing I forgot. So the Democrats were looking at this, and they were saying, okay, so to get rid of the Electoral College, they would have to do a couple of things. First, they'd have to have, I think it's 3/4, they'd have to have a convention like they did for ERA. They'd have to get 3/4 of the states to agree, which isn't going to happen. Then even after that's done, then I think they have to have a 3/5 of both houses agree, and that's not going to happen. So getting rid of the Electoral College at this point is not even a possibility. So the Democrats got together and they decided, well, we don't like the Electoral College and we can't get rid of it legally, so how can we get around this? So they came up with something that I believe is unconstitutional, but here's what they said. They said, okay, instead of each district getting a vote, let's just pick a state, Arizona. So let's say that they have 10 districts. I'm just making numbers up to prove a point. Let's just say they have 10 districts. 5 vote Republican, 5 vote Democrat. That means each presidential candidate gets 5, plus the 2 senators get to go whichever way they want, okay? That's the way it is under the Electoral College. So what Arizona said is, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to take all of our votes and all of our electoral votes, and we're going to designate them for whoever gets the popular vote nationwide. So as an example, what they're saying is, okay, so in the last presidential election, Clinton carried the state, but Trump got some of the votes. This next election, what they're saying is, with the same vote, if the Democrat wins the national election by one vote, the majority by one vote, all of the electoral votes for Arizona is going to go for the Democrat. That is not the intention of our founding fathers. I believe that to be unconstitutional, and it will be challenged at one point. They said you need 270 to win. The states that have done that right now total 189 electoral votes. Last week, we wrote about Democratic ambitions to pack the Supreme Court. Oh, that was another one they wanted to do because they didn't like the outcome. This week, the Electoral College is on the chopping block as Senator Elizabeth Warren comes out in favor of its abolition. Beto O'Rourke makes sympathetic noises, and Colorado's Democratic governor signs a bill adding his state in the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, scrapping the system the U.S. has used to elect presidents since its founding will likely soon be the Democrats' default position. Like the Supreme Court, the Electoral College sometimes frustrates the will of the political majorities. That makes it an easy target in this populist age. But while majority rules has always been an appealing slogan, it's an insufficient principle for structuring an electoral system in the United States. Presidential elections often do not produce popular majorities. In 2016, neither Hillary Clinton nor Donald Trump won 50%. Plurality rules doesn't have the same ring to it. In the absence of the Electoral College, the winner's vote share would likely be significantly smaller than is common today. Third-party candidates who can't realistically win a majority in any state would have a greater incentive to enter the race. Democrats are upset that Mr. Trump is president with 46% of the vote to Mrs. Clinton's 48%. What if a Republican was elected with a third of the vote in an election featuring 5 formidable third-party candidates? A free-for-all plebiscite would hurt the system's legitimacy. The Electoral College helps narrow the field to 2 serious contenders as voters decide not to waste their vote on candidates who have no chance to win. The founders designed the Electoral College to help ensure that states with diverse preferences could cohere under a single federal government. Anyone who thinks this concern is irrelevant today hasn't been paying attention to the current polarization of American politics. The Electoral College helps check polarization by forcing presidential candidates to campaign in competitive states across the country instead of spending all of their time trying to motivate turnout in populist partisan strongholds. In a popular vote contest in 2020, for example, the Democratic candidate might ignore the economically dislocated areas that Mr. Trump won and focus on urban centers along the coast. Mr. Trump might campaign more in upstate New York or Texas, but ignore urban voters. The Electoral College also contributes to political stability by delegating vote counting to the states and thus delivering, with rare exceptions, a faster result. The uncertainty arising from nationwide recount for president amid myriad regional irregularities, as happened in North Carolina and Florida in 2018, would make Florida 2000 look tame. The Electoral College abolitionists are unlikely to get a supermajority of 3/5 of states to agree to pass a constitutional amendment. The greater danger is the popular vote compact that Colorado has joined, which requires signatories to ignore the voters and grant their electoral votes to the national popular vote winner. It goes into effect once states representing 270 electoral votes have signed. If the governors of New Mexico and Delaware sign their states' bills as expected, then 14 states and the District of Columbia with 189 votes will have signed up. A Democratic sweep at the state level could one day get to 270. The pact is likely unconstitutional, but if it succeeded, it would inject more corrosive uncertainty into American elections in pursuit of a hyper-populist system that goes against the structure of the Constitution that has protected liberty for 230 years. We are in dangerous times, folks. You know, I heard Rush Limbaugh one day say that the goal of the left is to get rid of elections, and I laughed at the time because I thought, well, there's no way. Well, let's follow the logic out for a minute. If they manage to get to the popular vote and get rid of, in effect, get rid of the Electoral College, they will have a non-beatable majority. If they have a non-beatable majority, and like I said earlier, the first thing that would go would be the term limits for president. If that happens, we now have a king or a dictator. And if that happens, we don't need elections unless he decides to call one, or she decides to call an election, which why would they? Once you have absolute power, then you have no need for anybody or anything else. Your whole goal is to keep the power and reward your friends and punish your enemies and keep power. That's the goal. They're fighting, the left is fighting on all fronts. Packing the Supreme Court is another one, and I may do a story about that next week. I don't know. But when the Republicans were out of office, you know, and if you've been following the right-wing Reverend, you know that in years 6 and 7 of the Obama administration, I laid out a program that should be followed. And I was complaining. In fact, that whole program got started because by the 6th year of the Obama administration, the conservatives had completely lost their seat at the table, at the Republican table and the Democrat table. Because even at the Republican, it was all establishment Republicans. That was when the Tea Party got formed, and that's when conservatives' voices started being heard. If you go and you look at the states where those Tea Party members are from, they're not from New York or California or Florida or Texas. Well, there might be one from Texas. They will be from the Midwest, the flyover country. But once they get an absolute majority and it's unbeatable, they'll just end elections. We'll have a king and we'll have a permanent house, and they'll do whatever they please. I see that happening. This is important, folks. The way politics has been done up to this point is that the party that is out of power tries to works to build their party back up so that when the election comes around, we can win through elections. One of the things that separates our country from the rest of the countries in the world is a peaceful transfer of power. If this happens, like the Democrats are planning, if this happens at the election time, we will have no peace. There will be civil war. That will happen. It's percolating underneath the surface as we speak because of the nasty talk, the vindictiveness, the all-out assault on conservatives and Christians and this president. If they change the rule and cheat, there will be hell to pay. I'm just sounding the bell right now so that we as conservatives can let our legislators know we don't want any part of this popular vote bullcrap. Our founding fathers were geniuses. We have survived this long and kept our republic alive because of what they've done. To subvert that now would be suicide nationally. And we've got to stick together, and we've got to let our legislators know. And if they're voting for this crap, we need to get them out of office. Colorado, what are you thinking? Get rid of those people that voted for that. Vote them out of office. Vote in some, I don't care if they're Democrat or Republican. but vote in constitutionalist, not anarchist. Well, this program, like every other program that we do, is sponsored by the Prayer Box Ministry. Go over and check us out, prayerboxministry.org. There's lots to do over there. We like to say you can do one thing every day, 7 days a week for 7 years and never repeat what you're doing over there. Go over there and check us out, prayerboxministry.org. All of these programs are over there. Right-wing Reverend programs are over there. You can join a prayer group. You can have somebody read the Bible to you. Lots to do over there. Go over there and check us out, prayerboxministry.org. Well, that's a program, everyone. You have a blessed week. I look forward to next week when we can sit down and talk about this week in politics.